This is Cybersecurity Distilled with Andy Bennett.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of Cybersecurity Distilled, an Apollo production. Here today, we're going to talk with Jennifer Gold, Apollo Information Systems Vice President of Threat Intelligence. And if I'm butchering her title, it's because she's new. We don't normally interview our own, because I also work for Apollo Information Systems, obviously, but the topic today is just too good not to bring Jennifer in. And we're very excited to have her, and she'll introduce herself and tell us a little bit about herself in a minute. But the topic today is threat intelligence. And we will wander, we'll do our normal cybersecurity distilled, and we'll cover a lot of other areas that are not necessarily threat intelligence. But as you know, the point of this show is to take a complex topic and attempt to distill it while enjoying our favorite distilled spirits. And threat intelligence is like a smoky scotch in a bottle. It's something that we absolutely have to have. But not everybody actually understands, and not everybody can tolerate. Really, smoky scotch is not something that is for everybody, but absolutely belongs in the portfolio for everybody. And to that end, before we start diving into the discussion, I hope the cork sound came across very well. I've brought a very smoky scotch for today. It's Ardbeg, not a sponsor, but you could be, as I say every week, which is a very peaty, very smoky whiskey that is a good go-to and a standard in scotch drinking circles, and I think is the perfect beverage to distill threat intelligence. Jennifer, what are you drinking?
I have Blanton's, recommended to me by Dave. So I'm typically not a drinker of amber colored beverages, and I asked Dave for a recommendation. So this is my first time trying it.
Well, you will be ruined. It is fantastic.
And I'm having it neat with a couple of drops of water to bring out the flavors.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Blanton's is a really solid choice. Had you already started? Had you tried it before we got started?
No, first sip.
So what do you think?
Good. There's like a little bit of vanilla in there, maybe. Little oaky, but not too oaky. It's good. Very smooth.
It is very smooth. It has a die-hard following among bourbon lovers. I have a bottle from 2011 in my liquor cabinet that has been slowly surviving, but dying very slowly, and kept in a very sealed area so that it doesn't evaporate on us and go bad while we enjoy it. My brother and I have a drink from it about once a year together. And so we've been working on that one. I think we opened it in 2015. So it's very slow process, and we're trying to appreciate it, because back when, just like so many other things, the cost value slash what's the word I'm looking for? The nostalgia effect of that bottle is fantastic. But when we bought that bottle, it was like $50. And inflation has changed the value of $50, but not to the point of what Blanton's costs today. Mm-hmm. So like I said, you're going to be ruined. It's a great place to start. It doesn't leave you a lot of room for improvement.
Well, the bottle itself is beautiful, and on the top of it, it has this horse, and it's supposed to be, because it's from Kentucky, it's supposed to be the Kentucky Derby, right? And if you collect the bottles, there is an initial, so it eventually spells out Blanton's.
Correct. You just have to go through enough bottles to get to it. And there's a whole subculture around collecting the horses.
Yeah. They're beautiful bottles, though. So it's very cool. So a whole new experience for me.
Welcome to the club, then. And
thank you.
I hope the rest of the bottle treats you very well as well. So tell the audience a little bit about yourself. I know about you, but they may or may not, depending on who's watching. So tell us about your background. Just give us the quick, who is Jennifer?
All right. So my background, I started off, I'll go way back. I'll start maybe to kind of tell a little bit of the origin story. So originally I had, and I have this in mind because I have a son preparing to go to college. And I started out in college as a psychology major. And, those were my original plans, which I often joke. I use those skills sometimes more often than my technical skills in this field. But I started off as a psychology major. And during my time in college, I worked in the computer lab. And that's where I just really felt very passionate about technology. I'd always loved technology. And I liked early video games, and I was always drawn to it. But I really found like I was kind of with my people, when I was in the computer lab. And it just was this, place I loved. And at some point during my senior year, there was a woman who was running the help desk for the university, and she left, and they needed somebody to help fill in for her. So I ended up taking on a role where I would kind of fill in for her, part-time as I was still going to school. And one day she was my senior year, spring semester, and a call came in from a recruiter for her from MTV Networks. And they were looking for her, to go interview for this job opening they had. And so I said, she's not here, but I'm here and I have the same skills. So I offered to go on the interview. I did not own a suit. I did not have a resume, and I pulled it out of a hat, quickly pulled a resume together, put on all black. I figured that would work for MTV and be, not too stuffy. And on the interview I went. And so during the interview process, I noticed on the monitor next to the person who was interviewing me, they had an icon for DP Umbrella. It was an umbrella. And that was something that we had used for our help desk software at the university. And I had helped roll that out. So, they were asking me questions and I was completely out of my depth. But I said, excuse me, I can't help but notice the red umbrella icon. Is that DP Umbrella? And we started talking about this, which is going to make me sound like a dinosaur, by the way, for referencing this. But they ended up, saying, oh, we just got the software and talking about it. So that was the one thing I knew. So I spoke about that, and I spoke about it a lot. And somehow I ended up getting a job offer and landing there. And it was like this serendipitous moment in my life, to do like tech field support. And I was starting out with advertising, sales, and commercial operations. And, pretty demanding teams. They had a lot of tech issues, and I was not prepared. So, it was really like this deep end of the pool experience where I had to learn really quickly. But what I've learned about myself is I seem to thrive in those types of environments, whether it's high pressure, having to figure things out quickly. I adapt and I like to learn. And, so I had a great team. In fact, the people I worked with then, I'm still friends with today. And I'm happy I can say that across the board, my different jobs that I've held. Although this, the tech community is a pretty small one as far as the world goes, I'm happy, to have built a lot of great relationships. And so, I stayed there for a few years and I worked on different, I started working on productions, different award shows. And, it was really, really an incredible experience. Got to live in the Bahamas for a few months for I Love MTV. And, do all of those tech setups for green rooms and whatnot. And then I moved on to the financial sector, where I've spent, 2 decades. So I can touch back on that and kind of the evolution of how I got into cybersecurity.
I'm sure we'll circle in, and I do want to know how you got into cybersecurity, but I think we should work it in. How many times have you gotten the "I want my MTV" jokes?
Oh yeah, a lot. But I will say, like, I was there for the end of it while it was still MTV, and it was really fun. And in fact, here's a little known fact. So one day I was I was in a producer's office and I was doing something to fix, their computer, and they were looking for people to go for this show they had launched. And then the producer asked me if I was interested in being on the show, and zero acting experience or anything. I said, of course, let's do it. And so anyway, there's a show that aired for one season, Apartment 2F, and good luck finding it, but I was on that show. So it was very funny.
Well, it's all about saying yes to the opportunities in front of you and not running away from them. I get asked a lot, and not the topic I want to cover overall. I want to make sure we do get to threat intel, but I get asked a lot about career trajectories and advice on how to get places and whatnot. I think you've just highlighted something I could have kept coming back to over and over and over again, which is the best way to get ahead is to find a way to say yes. That's not to say yes to everything and set yourself up for failure, because there are things you should say no to. But I guarantee the average person out there is saying no to more things than they should. And that's what may be holding them back, other than just not delivering. Because if you say yes and you don't deliver, it will hold you back. But saying yes to the opportunities in front of you has been absolutely critical to my success.
No, I would agree with that completely. And, I have a friend who's been on this mission to say yes. And she was telling me to, like, everything she gets invited to, she's been traveling, going to things. She's just saying, a year of yes. And, it's been a really cool adventure for her. But to your point, I think a lot of people are hesitant to maybe get into this field, and they might not have the confidence, or they might be fearful. So I like to remind people just to proceed, with confidence. And sometimes you're building the plane in midair, right? And as you're flying it, and, it's okay. I think people need to realize that, it is very powerful to say yes to things.
The plane doesn't need landing gear if you never land, just for the record.
Yeah, there you go.
I've heard that analogy used so many times, and it just occurred to me that you don't have to install the landing gear. You can just keep flying and climbing.
Yeah, that's true. I like that.
Focus on the engine and the gas tank.
Yes. Unless, like, you're trying to leave the stratosphere and it experiences unplanned rapid disassembly. Was that what we heard yesterday? Something like that.
That's what we heard, yes. The unplanned rapid disassembly, also known as giant fireball explosion of this most powerful rocket ever. But I also read, so actually, let's talk about failure. I read that they consider it to be nothing short of a massive success, and the entire company cheered at the top of their lungs at the explosion. Not because they were happy it exploded. They were happy that they had met and exceeded the goal of the day. And the goal of the day was, can this thing even get off the launch pad? Not only did it get off the launch pad, it made it to the first maneuver, which was the flip in preparation for separation. Separation was a holy grail goal.
Yes.
And they got so far down that journey that it was nothing short of a New Year's Eve style celebration on the ground when it blew up. It was a $3 billion firework. How do you feel about failure? Do you think people treat failure the wrong way? Do you think people assign the wrong value to failure? And when is it okay to fail?
I absolutely think it's, people assign the wrong value to it. And I mean, so people look at things that I perceive to be just iterations and evolving as failure. There is this, I think we live in this society where, we see a lot of, glossed over imagery, whether it's on Instagram or wherever. We're fed sort of these images of perfection, and we hold ourselves up to these thoughts and ideas around perfection and what that looks like, and that everything has to be this, curated, perfectly crafted delivery, this perfection. And we have to get it right every time, or, we're a failure. And, the real value is learning and evolving and growing. And it's, I think it's such a beautiful part of life to know that you've fallen down, or you haven't gotten something right, or, and then you finally get to the stage where you evolve and you get there. And that's accomplishment, and such a great, feeling. But I think we're always evolving as people, and we should never, look at failure in a bad way. But there is, there are circumstances where you're in a position where it's a life and death situation, and you clearly want to have mastered your skills and, be mindful of your responsibilities. If someone dies because of you, that's a different sort of criteria, right? But on the whole, I think talking about kind of the smaller things in life, or just career and learning pieces, I think we're evolving, not failing. So I can appreciate that, and it was a beautiful moment, like that takeoff and all of it. It was beautiful. It was really amazing. And the aspirations for, the potential outcome with the split and everything, they did seem rather elaborate to me.
I mean, I'm not sure why they needed to flip first. That's actually watching it. I was watching and it did this little flippy burst maneuver thing. That's a technical term. My sister-in-law actually works in aerospace, and she's probably going to harass me about this later if she ever hears it. But the little flippy maneuver that it did, I thought was completely unnecessary. There's a whole lot of rockets that have blasted off before it, multi-stage rockets, that separate in line without having to do a flip first. I thought it was probably overly showy and not productive, but also par for the course for the organization. They did just launch a 400-foot tall, I'm exaggerating by only a few feet, rocket in the air. So I don't know. I do like the notion of iteration versus failure, that what a lot of people mistakenly see as failure is actually iterative success that hasn't made it to the final objective. I think that's a great take that I've asked this question before to other people, and so far I think that's my favorite take. I reserve the right to change my mind later. But iterative success versus failure, and there's a lot of verbiage around things like fail fast, right? Fail friendly, fail fast, fail first, crawl, walk, run, and you frequently get people wanting to sprint before they've even crawled, and they don't understand what that difference is, and sometimes through no fault of their own, though. And in cybersecurity, I see that all the time. We get people out there saying, well, you have to have a vulnerability management program in place. I'm just picking any one of the many things that people say. Vulnerability management is just on my mind today. You have to have a vulnerability management program in place. But by saying that, and then they go out and they buy a tool and they connect it to a couple things and they start scanning things, and they're just left with a mountain with 10,000 findings that they have no way to prioritize or tackle. Right? It's iterative success versus just failure is a great way to approach that. And it's really easy to see the inability to action 10,000 new vulnerability alerts tomorrow as failure. But yesterday you didn't know you had 10,000 actionable or 10,000 vulnerable systems, 5,000 of which are exploitable and all of which need to be handled. That's a success. That's an iterative success, and you have not successfully protected the environment. I like the approach, and I'm just applying it to an example that came up earlier today with fake numbers, just for the audience's sake. Very nice round numbers. Go ahead.
No, to your point on that, thinking about, people have this, idea too. If you take this, thought of perfection and failing, they have this idea that they have to cover all bases to be cyber secure. So, people need to understand the word continuous. We are continually evolving. This landscape is continually evolving. We are iterating constantly. I am very passionate about this field. So I am constantly learning, educating myself, understanding all these different nuances, the ways in which, I might be looking at ransomware, malware, the way at which something's changing, how it's adapting, evolving, changing, and how we need to, look at our own strategies and how we approach it. And, I think it's people get overwhelmed because it's this vast, vast landscape. It's, this ocean that they're trying to, secure. Well, they're not honing in on, the targeted threats, the immediate threats to their organization and what they need to, truly defend and how they can be successful in, these different steps. And people often buy many layered solutions, like you said, and spend tremendous amounts of money and don't even configure them properly or really understand the what or the why of doing things. And, there's a lot of opportunity to kind of step back. And I think we need to change our perspective on cybersecurity in general. We're very reactive as a nation, globally. We're reactive to cybersecurity. And I think it's really, a time to kind of look at things in a different way. So perspective is very important.
Yeah, I often see organizations, and you probably do too, and you can disagree otherwise, and that'll be fun too. But I often see organizations, they identify a who. We have a person, or we have a partner, or whatever. We have a who, and we pick a how, but we completely neglect what and why.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
I have a who can run a solution, and I have a how. I'm going to go buy a vulnerability management platform. But the what and why, what are we going to scan? What are we doing? What are we accomplishing? Why are we going to be doing these things? That thing costs money. The who costs money when we assign them to the thing. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we don't necessarily consider all those things. So in the vein of continuous improvement, and circling back around into the origin story, and in light of always evolving, how did you go from the help desk at a university to MTV, which is clearly through seizing the day and grabbing those opportunities, to cast member in Apartment 2F, to cybersecurity? When did you first see cybersecurity as something you were interested in? Let me start there. When was that? Because I actually don't remember. We've talked about some of the origin story and I love it, but I don't remember when the transition happened. When did you first see, understand, and find interest in cybersecurity?
So, I think first came security. I would say first came security and then cybersecurity, and I can explain some of that. So I made the shift from MTV into the financial sector, and I went to work for Deutsche Bank, which is the opposite of MTV. Very, very different environment. And I was working at 130 Liberty, which is a building across from the World Trade Center. And, but I wanted to be in the financial sector because I understood they were making a lot of investments on technology. It was a place I could be around the latest and greatest technology. And it seemed like a very inspiring place to be, and sort of that I was drawn to this sort of fast-paced, type environment. And so, I think it was I would say right around, 9/11 and the events of 9/11. My world changed. I was in New York City, and I had just such a different perspective on everything from a security perspective following 9/11. And I remember having, this feeling that I wanted to use my skills or whatever I could, and I kept trying to figure out, how do I contribute in a meaningful way? And from stopping bad things from happening? Can I use my technology skills? What can I do? Can I work with the military? Can I work with law enforcement? How can I help? How can I help the world in a meaningful way with my technology skills? And I started asking myself, like, what could I do to contribute to making sure that day never occurs again for us? And, I've always been very, very patriotic, very passionate about supporting the country and also, stopping bad things and helping other people. Those are things that are just kind of about me as a person. And so I think my perspective on security really changed at that point. And then for cybersecurity, I started to get into that more down the road. I was at a startup called Lava Trading, which was acquired by Citigroup. And they finalized that around 2005. And I started integrating, all of our technology into electronic executions trading and the other city platforms. So, we're integrating companies and technologies, and I was on the trading floor part of the time and in an office the rest of the time. And, having responsibility for all of, these areas within trading, security was, at the forefront. So now I was also dealing with, regulators and compliance and, everything we did had to get approval from security and be reviewed by security. And so I became very interested in security, and I sought out a couple of mentors. And one of the people from Lava Trading, who was over at Citi after and is a friend to this day, was a great mentor. He always, explained to me what he was doing on the security side. And then a lot of my learning was self-taught. I just started kind of immersing myself in cybersecurity because I really wanted to understand it. But the individual I'm speaking of happens to live in Austin now. So, which is very interesting. He made his way around. He was at Netflix and all kinds of interesting places. And now he's in Austin. So I'll get to reconnect.
I'd love to go meet this person.
Yeah, I get to bring it full circle. And
that's right. That'd be fantastic.
Really cool. Yep.
So what was your first cybersecurity assignment? Mine is easy to pinpoint. It was October of 2003. I was the joke I like to tell is I was the highest ranking, low ranking person on the totem pole in the office that day, because nobody above me wanted to do it and nobody below me had the skills to do it. And so we had an incident come in, bad stuff started popping up in the logs, and they said, Andy, you're up. And they sent me out, and I marched off dutifully to go solve my incident. I did solve the incident. There was an investigation afterwards, and I did that. And that was my first digital forensics work, all kinds of stuff. I put together the case over the next month or so. And then it got reviewed on, I want to say like December 10th or 12th of that year, because it was late October. And I got my guy, and he had left 2 days before. It was an insider, and they had stood up a where's site, if you remember those.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. It stood up a where's site. So I had taken down an illegal pirating ring. And no justice was served. And that was also the first time I had a bad guy get away, which has happened many, many times since. So what about you? What was your first, the thing you remember that now I'm a security person, whether you liked it or not?
Well, I guess the early version of that was even at MTV, in the field, right? I was, I remember, all of the PCs were hit with a virus. And I remember going around with taking a disk and going from machine to machine. And it was early incident response, and then we started talking about Y2K, and we were doing the Y2K prep, and all of that. So that was kind of the foreshadowing. And then first, hands on keyboard, I was doing firewall changes. And it was because they needed to be done. And the person who was supposed to be doing them had left spontaneously. We'll leave it at spontaneous. But he was kind of a character.
Unplanned disassembly of the team.
Yes, that. There was a lot of that I've seen over the course of my career.
Yes. I once backfilled. I wasn't a part of the initial team. I once backfilled at a bank that lost all of their small team overnight. They were all looking for jobs and they all got them at the exact same time.
Yeah. And some of them at the same place. They package deal, right?
No, none of them went to the same place. No, this was just nobody wanted to work there anymore, or everybody was looking for whatever was next. And they all landed jobs at the same time. One of them would go in and put notice and the other one would be like, really? Me too.
Yeah.
So I got hired to come in and help keep the ship afloat and get the new folks trained up and stuff. And I spent a year with them and we kept the place running, and great success story. The VP that I trained up and left behind, actually now she's SVP and she's still there, probably getting ready to retire and cause this same problem again. But she's still there. Great success story.
Amazing. I was at Citi for 12 years. So I stayed through so many iterations of that, right? So many changes to the organization. And I kept getting more and more responsibility. So there were a lot of places where they did not, people left and they didn't rehire people. And I would take on more responsibility. And, over the course of my career there, I held roles that started from like an application support side to kind of, being at that lava trading startup where I was doing a little of everything, and had a lot of responsibility. And then, being a sysadmin, systems engineer, and, then getting into the networking side and then overall infrastructure. And then when I finally left there, I was architecting. And I was architecting low latency trading solutions for options market making and derivatives trading. And so it was this really incredible evolution, so I had so many life events that happened during that time period, and I got to grow, a lot in the organization. And I for my whole time there, as far as engineers go, I was the only female engineer in a group of over 200 people. So that was very interesting too.
Only one?
The only one.
Wow. So I've been a part of a lot of teams, and I'm not surprised to see, teams of 5 or 10 be almost or completely men, but 1 out of 200, that feels extreme, which is also highlights the need for education and getting more girls interested in STEM earlier. But I didn't come in through STEM. What's your degree in?
Oh, so I was an English major and then psychology.
Yeah, exactly. And you mentioned psychology earlier, but I knew there was more. So
oh yeah.
Yeah, I have a history degree, and I think that the critical thinking skills and the research skills in my history degree actually helped prepare me a lot better than some of the folks who came in with straight computer science. Now, that doesn't mean that anybody of any background can't be successful, but I credit some of my success to those things. I do have a master's degree in the field, but that's only because I got laid off in 2008 and didn't want to do it again. And I thought maybe a master's degree in the field would help avoid that for the history major, right? But is solving the workforce crisis is where I'm headed with this, but is getting more girls interested in STEM the solution, or what's the solution? Because we've got 750,000 to who knows how many. The estimates are all over the place. Open job recs looking for people. Now, some of those are experienced positions that we just haven't built the pipeline to fill, but entry level or lower level, because our industry also struggles with what really is entry level. But in those positions, what's the solution? What's Jennifer's approach to solving the workforce gap?
Well, I'll say this, like my situation is probably unique in that the financial sector is very much a male dominated industry. and then take, technology on top of that, and which has often been, male dominated. That's changed a lot. But early on in my career, it made sense. Like there was one woman, Mary, she was on the telco side, but that was the closest person, and she was dealing with vendors and things like that. But I was the only engineer, but that was the closest to another female for that whole period of my career. And where I think we need to get better at just increasing a diverse pool, for this field, women and everyone, because we really need full representation.
That's the what. Where's the how?
Well, where we need to do that is, really addressing our curriculum. And I feel like we need to, start, it's cybersecurity and all of these technologies are so fundamental to how we operate as a society, yet they're not woven into the standard curriculum in most public schools in our country. You may have different programs or things that get brought in, but those are, these bolt-on type programs. It's not part of like the standard curriculum. And that weakens us so much, because, children should be exposed to, one, we're giving kids cell phones and, tablets and access to the internet without any understanding.
Devices everywhere with no understanding, just intuitive use and good UI. And by good, I mean easily usable, not easily protected.
Right. And we're not educating children how to protect themselves. And they're targeted, that's a whole other topic, but, they're targeted on games. They're targeted on social media platforms. And, you hear these terrible stories of things that go on. We need to educate. It's like we put stuff out into the world with no safeguards and no thought. And, we need to be more thoughtful in how we approach things and educate people and how to use things. And, certainly I think if, a more diverse pool of people were getting exposed to cybersecurity and realizing it was a field that was so, encompassed so much that there were, opportunities for them, I think we'd have a lot more people interested. I think it's something that, it's ambiguous to people. They don't understand it. It's not part of their, what they learn. And so I think really education is a huge piece of it. And then again, the word continuous education, because we're not upskilling or reskilling our workforce, and then we expect people to do certain jobs. If we look at smart cities and we look at municipalities and, a standard widget is now getting replaced with a smart device. We need to continually upskill, train people, and, not render them obsolete. They need to be.
For everyone out there, you're
invested.
thinking, is that really happening? And as you're adjusting the temperature on your app on your phone for your connected thermostat, just pointing that out there and where this is touching everybody's daily lives. The note I wrote down, because I write notes to make sure I can circle back in the conversation and stuff like that. The note I wrote down is fundamental access to cybersecurity, because technology is embedded in everything. And I think that's something we are definitely missing. And I wish I had the solution, because I'd probably be a very wealthy man or a pauper overnight, because nobody would be happy with me for solving the problem. And I see that as a potential issue as well.
I also think there have been barriers to entry. A lot of the training and certifications have been cost prohibitive. And, that's a barrier to entry for people. I think just my own passion taught me to be, largely self-taught. And so I would spend extra time, like just researching and delving into things, asking questions, finding mentors. And I drove that. But I've often taken a step back and thought, why are some of these classes and certifications so expensive, when we need people in this field, and we should be encouraging people, in this field to get trained. So, there's a lot to solve for to make it more equitable and accessible.
Absolutely. Well, and just to meet the need, unlike a lot of other fields, and I'm always curious why fields that require zero physical input, like you do not have to be a strong person physically to do finance. You do not have to be a strong person physically to do computers in any form, right? How fields that don't require any of that still at any stage after, I don't know, 1960 still remain dominant for anything by a gender or any other descriptor is astounding to me.
Right. But those themes, still run true. Like,
They do.
I was growing up, I loved science and math. And I was encouraged to, become a teacher one day. So I would be home in the summers with my children and then encourage and writing and, English arts. And that's like within, kind of the context of like the school and, some members of my family until they later saw what my passions were. But, I think it's a narrative, that we're not, and now it's changed. I mean, it's really changing, and I think we're celebrating so much more of diversity in the STEM field. So I am excited to see that and that progression, but we still need to do better, and I think, I always think, for if we want to talk about like being a mom, and being in this field, it's a great field to be in and to be a mom, this like being in technology, there have been remote capabilities far before COVID and opportunities that were in existence and in practice with great success far before COVID. So, well, all of that sort of world is a balance,
I worked
you
from
know.
2007
Yes.
completely. I remember it was a really cool moment for me the first time it happened. I took a meeting from the top of the ski mountain in Steamboat because that's where I was when it was time for the meeting. My calendar did its dingy thing. I put my headphones in. We did have headphones before iPods. I'm just saying, right?
Yeah.
Before the Apple Buds or whatever they're called, because I'm a Samsung guy. But all of those things, they're not new, but the world seemed to think they came about because of COVID.
Mhm.
I want to redirect the conversation because eventually we are going to get to threat intelligence. the
Bless you.
Thank you. The shift in your career or the point in your career, because something you left off is that you're highly involved in a public-private partnership organization that partially exists with the sole goal of sharing intelligence that hopefully helps people protect themselves, their organizations, and their peers across the country. And I don't know what the rules are for sharing the name of that organization and your role with it, which is why I didn't. And you also, who knows, if somebody watches this 4 years from now, you may not be that individual in that organization anymore. But how did you get involved in the public-private partnership information sharing community?
So while I've been in the financial sector for a couple of decades, there were a couple of periods where I also did some contract work with the government and, and worked on some various projects. And I had also post 9/11 done a lot of outreach to NYPD and, really built some phenomenal friendships, that I still have to this day, great relationships and, offering, how can I help you? What can I do? How do we work together? And I started to really kind of dream about what is possible. How do we all work together? What is the common denominator? And where do we all meet that we come together and make a difference? Because I saw very clearly, the failures that, caused, 9/11, the failures in communication and the things that we didn't do. And we all learned those lessons. And so understanding, this ecosystem and security, cybersecurity, and the very importance of coming together and knowing we all have these different skill sets and, some of the best teams I've been on have been a combination of people who come from the private sector, military, intelligence community, law enforcement, and everyone has this different sort of lens in which they view security and cybersecurity and defense. And it's like magic when you bring people together from everywhere, and you start coming up with the strategies and solutions, and it's a game changer. And so I've seen the impact of that. And following all of these events in my career, I met some people from the FBI. So I can say I'm president of New York Metro InfraGard, which is the public-private partnership with the FBI. I cover New York. We have New York City, Long Island, Westchester, and some of the Hudson Valley as well, with 2,500 members within the organization, which is awesome. And, so I came to InfraGard through a contact I had met from the FBI, who was, went on to become a special agent in charge of cyber. And he recommended InfraGard to me and thought that would be a great fit for what I was hoping to achieve. And, and one of my goals has always been, how do I take what I learn and help educate others? And so that's part of the mission, is really educating the community. It's really, supporting critical infrastructure and, against attack, right? And how do we do that together? And so information sharing, how do we share information? First, kind of coming into that organization that's, and this, it's, like a vetted process. And then, we have secure.
I'm a member as well, just so everybody knows. I just wasn't going to specifically call out, because InfraGard has all kinds of rules and whatnot about what the appropriate way to disclose and or share that you are a member are. And so she needed to do that for herself.
Yes. Right. And I'm often, a speaker, and I speak about InfraGard, and I speak about the benefits of it and why it's important to be friends with the FBI. And, if you're in this field, why knowing who the people are at your local field office that you can call on if you experience, a cyber attack, something happens to your organization, the value in having those relationships in existence already and not after the fact is really important and really helpful to people. And just, in having those relationships, having, someone who can also provide you insight, intelligence, sharing information or insight into, a pattern or something that they're seeing that, may be impactful to your organization. Knowing that information is, game changing when you're responsible for defending an organization and protecting it. And so there's tremendous value in how we share information. And, I think the FBI has done a great job in this program and supporting it, because at the end of the day, it results in, less organizations, experiencing failure because of a cyber attack, and so it's very rewarding.
It is very rewarding. I've been a member since 2007 or 8, somewhere in there. Mm-hmm. And a whole lot of contacts, a whole lot of relationships, a whole lot of good work done has happened strictly as a result of that membership and relationship base. And it's been fantastic. I started off in the Houston chapter. I'm not as active in my current chapter here in the Austin metro area as I would like to be, but mostly because I'm just really busy with some other stuff. But I keep up with the folks who are active. I do participate periodically when I can. I never leave them hanging if they need a speaker or a panel member, because that's, in my opinion, one of the best ways to serve the community is by showing up and offering your opinions and also being open to being wrong. A lot of people show up, offer their opinion, but forget they might not be right. And so I try not to do that as well, because I don't want to be that guy.
Yeah. And, and in this, just I'll share very quickly too. And I agree with you. I've had so much value in it. I've learned so much. I've learned from my my peers, and I've called on people for guidance, and it's this incredible community. And, but there's something within me that's always looking to say, okay, where are the gaps? What is it that we're not addressing or looking at? How do we do better? I'm always raising that bar. I'm always iterating. And, so a few years back, I happen to have a lot of interest and passion about space technology and satellite technology, and understanding the lack of policy that exists around these assets, the criticality of these assets and the potential risks for, something happening to them from a cyber standpoint, it's tremendous. And so, I'm a huge advocate, for, space assets to be defined as critical infrastructure, which I do anticipate will happen soon. But I started to really, focus on space, and I formed, the Space ISAC had formed, out West, and I got in touch with them and, created an MOU and started working with them. And everyone kind of thought, okay, how is this relevant? What is this? But I think people have started now, especially, post Ukraine, they've started to understand what those threats are, and those conversations are happening more actively.
Well,
And
how it represents fits the criteria of separate and distinct critical infrastructure, I think was first highlighted through the conflict in Ukraine, especially with Starlink coming in to provide communication and whatnot. And I know there's been a little controversy around that and some back and forth, but the critical link that spaceborne technologies provide, it should not be understated, cannot be understated. It is massive. I've never thought about describing it discreetly as a separate critical infrastructure, though. And my quick thought is I completely agree. The second thought I have is that not already covered under communication and technology critical infrastructure?
No, not everything. No, not everything. And the ecosystem is different. It's its own distinct ecosystem. And the way, if you kind of look at the map and the way the construct and payloads and, just the entire flow of information, and it really is a separate entity. But yes, I mean, we can consider it under telecom, under communications, under, these different areas, but it really needs to be defined as its own critical infrastructure, because there are so many different aspects to it that make it unique. And the rapid commercialization that we're seeing right now in space, makes it really essential. And the threats, on that same side, the rapid commercialization, lack of, true safeguards and policies, and then the threats that we're seeing.
Double tap on that. Rapid commercialization, lack of safeguards and policies, a place I did not expect this conversation to go. By that same criteria and with the potential impacts, is artificial intelligence, irrespective of the medium by which it's delivered, utilized, accessed, or mediated in other ways, going to become its own critical infrastructure?
I don't know. I don't know if artificial intelligence is necessarily something I would define as its own critical infrastructure, but it's its own entity in that it's an area that, requires this sort of same approach, right? But it's not infrastructure per se. It's just that we need to be, it's another area. It's almost like, in a way, if you're talking about, think about like the proliferation of, all these different devices that exist in our world that are not critical infrastructure, but they're so important to cybersecurity. It's very, very similar. I got involved, and as a founding member and co-chair of the National AI and Cybersecurity ISAO, Information Sharing Analysis Organization. And we started exploring this convergence of AI and cybersecurity and the ways in which, machine learning and AI benefit cybersecurity, from, anomaly detection to operational efficiency, something we absolutely need, to also exploring, the alternative side of that. What happens, like what protections are in place, and what happens with scenarios like AI poisoning or changes within AI models, and how are we detecting for that? What are we doing? And so now, similar to how satellites came into play with Ukraine and people started talking about it, now everyone's having this conversation because of ChatGPT. And what my thoughts are, again, it's an area where we don't have adequate policies. We don't have, proper framework or information sharing or threat intelligence around a dissemination of threat intelligence around what these threats are, that we can properly address things. And so we're seeing kind of things sprout up, in both of these ecosystems, whether it's the threats that we're seeing around within space and how things are being targeted from a cyber perspective, to the ways in which, polymorphic malware is evolving, through the use of generative like AI technologies. So it's fascinating. But I think at the root of it is that we do stuff kind of without consideration sometimes for second order effects. Like, what do we ever really, thoughtfully look at? What is this doing in the world? What do we need in place just to educate people on it, to have, and I'm not talking extreme things, I'm just talking common sense safeguards around it.
Common sense is not so common, though, which is part of the problem in every place where we try to apply common sense. Just throwing that out there. But I couldn't help myself, because your observations of the space tech, including lack of policy and the tremendous risk poses, the lack of sharing capabilities, the distinct ecosystem, and I left off critical infrastructure because I do agree with you that AI is not a separate critical infrastructure. It probably is a critical capability falling under the information technology sector. Critical infrastructure, but in and of itself is reliant on one or more other critical infrastructures for delivery.
Yes.
Which kind of underpins why it's not in and of itself a distinct critical infrastructure. Space, however, I'm still noodling on that one, because part of me says, well, it uses transportation to get into orbit. It uses information technology to be managed. It relies on government, even just for clearance for launch. It has tie-ins to so many others, but once it's up there, it is standalone. I think that's what the key differentiator is that AI, even though it fits every other criteria you gave me, doesn't stand alone at any point.
Right. And without it, I'm sure there will be some instances, but without it, what does that failure result in? And what does a failure result in for space assets if they fail?
Well, I think so. If that's the criteria, I think we need to revisit this topic in a couple more years, because we already have AI systems in so many places. The thing that has brought AI to the forefront of the discussion, the joke I like to say is it took it out of the lab and into practice in the real world, except it's already in practice in the real world. We've got AI systems driving Teslas. And we've got but we have no insight. The black box issue around it is where I have a problem. We have no insight into how Tesla has programmed its AI to handle the trolley problem.
Right. No, I get that. And again, I do agree with you, actually. I would classify AI under information technology as far as the sector. But no, you're completely right. And think about the prevalence of IoT, right? Let's talk about IoT. Another area where we have, and I say this with, sincerity, we have recklessly deployed IoT into the world without, true regard for consumers. And, the vulnerabilities, the things that have been, the result of a lack of, the right safeguards. And policy, again, policy, because now things are changing and evolving and the requirements are after the fact. But if you look at everything, like even the energy sector and how it's decentralizing and all of the devices and the IoT and all of these different areas, our threat landscape has morphed like exponentially. And so there are great considerations. That's why we all kind of need to be in this state of learning, evolving, and partnering together to share what knowledge we have.
I'm writing that down. I would also like to say that in no other show and in no other approach are you going to get statements like the threat landscape has morphed exponentially. That is a Blanton's and cybersecurity distilled approach.
Cheers.
Comment. Cheers.
And we're here to change it. Cheers. We're here to keep it safe.
That's right. Because you tied two separate statements together into one. And I think that's a Blanton's fusion, and I'm here for it. That's fantastic. So I want to talk about as I introduced it, the Ardbeg of cybersecurity. Let's talk threat intelligence directly, because if you go and look, and actually if you Google it and enjoy, if you Google it and you say Andy Bennett, threat intelligence, you will have a video pop up. It'll be probably the first search, depending. And it's a talk I did years ago in front of a fireplace. Beautiful cinematography. I had nothing to do with that part. And the talk I gave at the conference, which was not recorded, was around I can't talk all of a sudden. Threat intelligence and how to integrate it into your program. It was around threat intelligence, what it can be used for, what it's not. Because I always talk about how nothing is a panacea. So threat intel's not your breach remediation panacea, stuff like that. The talk I gave at the conference was probably way better. But the talk that I gave that is titled Threat Intelligence is about career development, pathways, the field as a whole. It's a very soft piece that they never changed the title to, because they used the title of my conference presentation for the video, even though the video was an interview that had nothing to do with the topic of the presentation. And so what it's doing there, and I need to reach out to them and get them to just go change the title. What it's doing there is it's muddying up the message on threat intelligence, because when you Google for threat intelligence, it's one of the results that comes up.
Mm-hmm. So this is a disinformation campaign. Is that what you're telling me?
Accidental disinformation campaign, because I was giving a good faith interview, and frankly, it's not a bad interview. It's 5 minutes well spent if you're looking to advance your career or understanding of the field at large. It has next to nothing to do with cyber threat intelligence. And I think there's a quintessential misunderstanding of threat intelligence as a whole, and the fact that there are many different flavors of threat intelligence. Like, threat intel is not new. We've been looking for intel against our enemies, and I'll call them enemies, because threat intel comes out of spycraft and military scenarios. This is a government espionage space that cybersecurity has inherited.
Yes.
And it's taken many forms. There are technical signals based, there's human intelligence, there's misinformation, there's on the ground campaigns. I'll use Stuxnet as an example. Before we could write Stuxnet, and the US did it. Mm-hmm. I'll say it just because it's not said in enough places. We did it. We created a cyber weapon to compromise the Iranian nuclear program. I was not involved in it. Just in case anybody's wondering how I know these things, none of your business. They were said in a public forum, which is why they're talkable. Right. The fact of the matter is we had to have intelligence on that facility to do it, because it was written so precisely, so tightly inside the niche to only target the facility that was being targeted. And then it was walked skillfully across an air gap into a tightly controlled facility. and then deployed and detonated. And it literally detonated. This is a cyber physical attack where we destroyed nuclear centrifuges. These are ginormous devices that spin at outrageous speeds. And if you introduce the improper vibrations into that system, they explode. We set the Iranian nuclear program back years using ones and zeros. And if they hadn't used the word Beetlejuice in the code, it probably wouldn't have been attributable to us, because it's a very American reference. Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice. And so the intel being the point of that, not the destruction, or even the result.
Or Beetlejuice.
Or Beetlejuice. I do love that movie, though. Some of his best
That's a
work.
great movie.
The impetus, the net result here is we had to gather a lot of intel before we ever were able to write the code to target the specific industrial control systems that allowed us to induce the vibration without reporting the error that made the systems explode. Intel is not new. It's not unique. But it's a critical and often overlooked component. What are your thoughts on Intel?
So I have a lot of thoughts on Intel. One, it's something people don't understand, but people do understand, if you explain to them that, Intel for a terrorist threat. So if you're explaining to someone, that law enforcement and like NYPD and, the FBI are working together, they're tracking intelligence around threats to New York City and New York City, certain targeted areas. People understand that, they understand the value in that, and that, what they're able to do is take this information, figure out if a threat is substantiated, and then they're either able to act in a very directed, targeted way. They're able to take this threat information, and apply, the right measures to protect that asset. And it's very simple. That's exactly what it is. It's, finding out what the threat is and protecting the asset. Now, I don't know if it's just in general, people struggle with a lot about understanding cybersecurity and what that means. But it's really essentially the same thing, using, the same type of tradecraft from, the world of, intelligence, right? Taking that plus the tremendous tools that have evolved, and there have been amazing, our ability to understand patterns and analyze patterns, has evolved a great deal in this field. So being able to bring all of these pieces together gives us an optic or a lens to look at very specific companies, assets, and figure out, who's targeting them, what's being targeted, when, and, it gives us actionable information so that we can then take steps to protect that asset. And, I think the focus has been so largely reactive on how we approach cybersecurity, and that we've accepted this terrible state of, we're under constant attack. Ransomware is, this everyday life occurrence that, people are dealing with. It's impacting individuals, businesses, schools, municipalities, counties, states. And we've accepted this state of being attacked. If you were to translate that to terrorism or a physical attack, would we accept that? We would not. So how do you get ahead of it? How do you change that? Because we cannot, continue operating in this model with any success. Catching things after the fact doesn't help. You have to come around to the other side of it. And I always refer to it left of boom, right? Come around to the other side of it and get to the origin before the attack. And then we have to get very good at doing that. And doing that requires, the same type of skills that it would to do this to protect an asset from terrorists. It's a similar concept, right? You've got human intelligence, and then you have all these other skills that you can layer in. Technologies, you can bring in OSINT skills. There's a lot that you can do to really get very specific and provide, strong, great data to organizations and protect them. And when we look at it from this perspective of, we're in this economy where we're all mindful of cost, the cost of cybersecurity programs, we want to make sure that we're being really efficient in our investments. And you can help guide a company through really smart decisions and how they protect themselves in a meaningful way and stop, from being attacked. If you start to, bring in threat intelligence into the equation. So I think it's truly invaluable. And I'm I'm very, very excited to be in this position because I truly believe this is where we make a difference. It does require a shift in mindset, though. We have to get out of this reactive mindset that we have, become very proactive in our approach, and realize this, this type of strategy, this approach to utilizing threat intelligence will be a game changer.
Now, I would like to point out that a lot of the type of approach you just highlighted is not necessarily tied to what the average, even cybersecurity practitioner thinks of as cybersecurity threat intelligence. You're talking about a human-centric, a threat actor-centric approach to threat intelligence that is not necessarily the signals-based threat intelligence that a lot of people are used to. And I'm using very technical threat intel terms now because I want to make sure we're drawing the distinction. That's the whole point of the show, is to distill a complex topic. And threat intel as a whole field is a very complex topic that includes everything from attack surface management to TTPs and IOCs to the kinds of things you have just alluded to and insinuated around human-centric intelligence practices that allow for proactive activities in advance of getting attacked that require that shift in mindset. So the intel, there's intel about yourself, which is where the attack surface management comes into play. And there's tons of ways and approaches to managing your attack surface. There's no silver bullet. And in no case across the board is there a silver bullet. Even knowing what's coming is not a silver bullet if you're not ready to action on that intelligence.
Right.
It feels like it would be, but it's not. There's no silver bullets, just enablers of action. And so the IoTs and IOCs, that was a Ardbeg inspired misspeaking. The IOCs and TTPs, indicator of compromises and tools, techniques, and practices, are just one approach, and they are a systematic approach, which is great, but they're a systematic approach to response, not defense.
Right.
They require somebody else to get hit before we can generate them.
That's exactly right.
Loses. It's a mindset of somebody has to get attacked and we will have as few losers as possible approach, as opposed to get ahead of the attack and take action. And there has been this kind of like secession or ceding of ground to the bad guys that has been pervasive across the industry, that I personally, it kind of gives me a sick feeling in the pit of my stomach, because I don't like the idea that we as an industry are willing to take an approach that requires somebody to have the bad thing happen to them. I call it the bad day. That requires somebody to have the bad day in order for the rest of us to be successful. I reject that premise, which is why I was so excited when it was suggested that I have you on. I was very excited because I know about the kinds of things you and your team are trying to do. And again, I normally don't even have internal Apollo people on the podcast, but this particular space is a place I've become very passionate about over the last year, because I've been the recipient of proactive information in past lives, and the provider of proactive information in my current life. And it makes such a difference. And I am not in any way demeaning or diminishing the value of other types of threat intelligence. Signals-based threat intel is absolutely a critical component to a full spectrum capability of defense. But understand that even if it's proactive for you, it was reactive for somebody else. Somebody else in this model, very much like insurance, actually. Lots of people pay into a risk pool in the hopes that they never use it. But the bad thing happens to somebody in the risk pool. Threat intel, signals intelligence threat intel is very much that way. Something bad has to happen to somebody before you get the good intel that allows you to proactively prevent it in your environment. That's just not a winning combination, because all they have to do is try 150 million novel attacks.
Right.
With the help of generative AI, that's not out of reach.
Right. Absolutely. No, you're completely and totally right. And there is this mindset that bothers me so much, that we would ever be willing to give all this power to criminals and, and bad guys who are doing this, right? And we've accepted circumstances that we should not. And, and that's the thing. And I guess that's also ingrained in me. I think about 9/11, and I think about a few days later, after all of it, I went back into the city and I went back to work. And, you can't accept and give over your power to people who wish to do bad things, right? That's what way of life is that? It's not. So, I think really we need, this is a big piece of this is, one, you studied military history, so you understand a lot of things. And I'm a big fan of, of history as well. And I love to go back and look at the strategies that were used, like during World War II or different times, and how people really, if like you take a problem and distill it, right? We've solved for this already. It's just, slightly different, but we already know the things that work and that work well. And it's not that complicated. We know how well intelligence works. And it's really applying something that, we have been so good at in our tradecraft and in intelligence, and applying it to this enormous problem we're having, so that we can change we need to do something to finally turn the tables. And I came to Apollo with the belief that this is it. This is what will make a difference.
And I really hope you're right. So I want to recap my notes for the last section, since the last time back, which was, one, you said Andy is completely and totally right. I don't hear that enough, so I needed to write it down.
Okay.
Two, the acceptance of circumstances that we should not is absolutely a critical and damning indictment of where we are as a whole around security. And I don't disagree with it. And I'm using the words with intent, not just with Ardbeg. It's critical and damning that we're willing to accept this level of consistent bloody noses, right? If my daughter were to come home with a bloody nose every other day because she let some kid punch her in the face, one, I'd be super livid with the school. But two, I'd be asking her why she didn't punch back, why she didn't block, why she didn't take some action, or why she even put herself in the situation in the first place. If it's something like, if you're always around that same kid and that same kid is always punching you in the face, please stop hanging out with that kid.
Right. Yeah. Well, then she has the intelligence also that this is continuing to go on, and that this is a pattern. It's a behavior. It's a pattern. Disrupt the pattern.
Yeah. Well,
enable and accept the pattern.
Farther up in the notes above, Andy is completely and totally right. was tools and pattern analysis. Absolutely. She more than would have, and my daughter is not getting punched in the nose, just for the record, just in case that was ever a question, right? It's more than anything else. She has the information. She just has to act on it. But not everybody has the information. You mentioned World War II, and I wrote that in my notes too.
Yes.
World War II and things that worked and stuff like that. And I'm gonna stretch us away from threat intel now and into deception.
Yeah.
The World War II comment really brought me to deception. Are you familiar with the deceptive approach we did to tell the Nazis that we were in somewhere we weren't? And I forget the details, and I probably wouldn't if I weren't in my second Ardbeg. But we literally used inflatables on a beach to trick them into thinking we had assets where we did not, so that we could pivot everything to the main frontal attack.
Mm-hmm.
What role do you think deception plays in proactive response?
It's the same thing if it was a physical, whether you're experiencing a physical attack or a cyber attack, it's all the same. What deception as a protective measure buys you space and time. And, it buys you a moment to collect your defenses and figure out your next action, whatever that action might be, and how you'll evade that threat. But it buys space and time. So it's a layer, right? It's a pause. It's hitting the pause button. One quick thing to mention on the World War II front, I'm very involved in veterans initiatives, and I do a lot of work in New York City volunteering with veterans as well. And I do a Valentine's with Veterans Valentine's Day party. Yeah. And it's very fun. And at one of those pre-COVID, I met this woman, and she was one of the original waves, and she was in her late 90s and had more energy than me and was unbelievable. But she was, heavily involved in, understanding encryption and supporting those efforts, and told me her story of how she came to the waves, which was a group of women who came into the Navy, and her role. And I kept thinking, I was talking with her about my role in cybersecurity and all these similarities. It was so interesting thinking about the difference that those women made when they came into the Navy, and their contributions, and, very kind of similar parallel. But also during World War II, we had civilians working with government and partnering with government and supporting our national security and sharing information, supporting efforts, because everyone felt a personal responsibility that it's the right thing to do. And everyone understood this idea of how we support our government, how we partner together. And that seems to be something that we don't see in society as much now, and why I think organizations like InfraGard are so impactful. But, sharing information and all of these things that helped change things, and we know what works. My whole point at the end of the day being, we know things that have worked throughout history that have a positive impact, that disrupt very bad things, that disrupt adversaries, that disrupt criminals. We have all that data. We have the information. It's just under a different lens. It's just something, of modern day society, but we can still apply the same principles, the same techniques, and the same thing that has always been, so incredibly important, which is relationships. We can have those relationships and then get ahead of things with, the right intelligence. So it's really interesting to me. I mean, I'd be curious to get your take on it, as you've studied far more history than me. And in your study of military history, you must see a lot of patterns repeat themselves.
There are a lot of patterns that repeat themselves, but my first response is, when are we going to set up a cyber wave core?
There you go. So you asked a
I'm
very
not talking
interesting.
about the military. I'm talking about you and me. We have
Yeah.
the ability to do something like
So,
this. We've got a very robust internship program and stuff. So we're going to take that offline. Remember
well,
that.
I
Uh,
will, but I do want to make one comment on that
yeah.
because I asked myself this question: why don't we have a civilian group that's supporting our military in cyber? And I asked around, and in 2019, the U.S. Marine Corps stood up their cyber auxiliary. And I am proud to say that I am a member of the U.S. Marine Corps Cyber Auxiliary and got involved in that. But I asked the rest of DoD, where is it? Went to my friends at West Point, where is it? We don't have that. We don't have that in place. We've done it with the Marine Corps with great success. I've been involved in cyber war games and it's been phenomenal. Training, learning from each other.
But I'm a West
Phenomenal.
Point legacy. So if that helps you in any way, let me know.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. We need this to exist across all of the places it doesn't. And that's part of my mission. Where aren't we connecting? And how can I help plug those, connections in? I did something similar with the space ISAC. I did it with the bio ISAC, which is a $950 billion business for the US economy. And so important, right? But again, an area that's lacking in cybersecurity and that we need to really support. So, all of these things are very interesting, but I agree with your point. So we'll revisit that piece of the conversation later.
Yeah, we'll take that one offline because that could impact our day jobs. But I'm very interested in it, so let's not let that die.
No, it won't.
The notes I took for this section are a blatant ripoff from the fashion industry. What is old is new again, or what I wrote in the cyber context is what is old can be new in cyber too.
Yeah. Yeah, I like it. It's true.
And it's all about intelligence sharing, information sharing, even more so than intel. Not all info is intel,
Right.
but all intel is info. And
Yes.
information sharing matters significantly. But what matters even more so is the ability to conduct the sharing. It's the relationships.
Yes.
And don't get me wrong, threat intel is a business. You know this even more so than me. Threat intel is a business, and it requires capital to keep going. But that doesn't mean necessarily that there's no sharing for the sake of sharing. And I do think that there's got to be better sharing mechanisms because not everything has to be capitalized.
Mm-hmm.
And not every win has to lead to monetary gain today. In the long term, if you provide value, people will come to you and money will show up. I'm a big believer in that philosophy. If you provide value and you put that out there in the world, money will follow eventually, hopefully in the right ways, but it will follow eventually. And so learning from the lessons of the past, I think we absolutely need to remember that what's old can be new. It's just in cyber too now.
Yeah. And, I think you're bringing up this really great example that we can address right now, right here for the audience about, some of the things that we see in the threat intel world might be for someone who isn't a client. We might see something for a company and, as a company, we are and one of the reasons I joined is because we are very mission focused. We care about the mission. I care about the mission. I care about overcoming this problem. And so we'll see things for companies and we engage in responsible disclosure. Would you like to maybe talk about that and your experience with responsible disclosure a little bit?
So yeah, and so for the audience, especially those long-term subscribers here, we normally don't dig into what Apollo does, but this is something I'm super passionate about. And we recently did bring Jennifer on board to lead this function for Apollo, which is that the ability that we have as a team to see things happening both across the industry and across the bad guy spectrum. I like to call them bad guys, not threat actors. And if you've seen previous episodes where we've talked about threat actors, you know that I call them bad guys because they do bad things.
I was calling them bad guys too. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, no, they're bad guys.
They are bad guys.
Can you believe I once got in trouble for calling them evil?
Yes, I can. I can believe it, but it shouldn't be the case.
I did. It got stripped out from something I wrote and something I said and a couple other things. But yeah, I'm sorry.
So this will get edited too.
Well, this will not get edited because I'll quit. Because that's one of the things I love about my current job that wasn't always the case in many past jobs, actually, not just one. It's not just the place where the example I'm thinking of happens, right? One of the things I love about this job is the ability to say the things that need to be said without editing because there isn't anything else stopping me from calling people who hold hospitals for ransom, people who hold towns for ransom, people who jeopardize people's water supply.
Yes.
Evil. They're not just bad guys. They're evil. But
Agreed.
Sorry, that's my soapbox.
No, I've had plenty.
The mission is to help as many people as possible. I'm a chronic do-gooder and many times over public servant. And
Cheers.
The mission never changed. Just the place and ways and means I have available to me to do it has changed.
Mm-hmm.
And in doing so, it doesn't matter if we make money on every interaction, which is contrary to a lot of private sector approaches, right? Mm-hmm. We should get paid because we put in the work. How about we get paid by not losing our communal asses?
Right.
There's more than one way to get paid, and cost and loss avoidance communally is one of those ways. A whole lot of the places that we've made responsible disclosure of things that are happening, because we have seen our various teams are very, very good. And that we have found and seen things happening at organizations that every single member of the audience has heard of.
Mm-hmm.
That impact many members of the audience and myself included. And we've been privileged enough to be able to reach out to organizations and help share intelligence that likely has literally saved lives.
Yeah.
And so from that, I don't know if I'm 100% answering your question, but the responsible disclosure piece is not just a business development technique for me. It is one of the ways, because there's more than one, but it's one of the ways that I can take the most pride in, even though it's not the thing I do myself every day, that we are giving back in a way that is selfless. Because not every single time are we going to get paid. Not every single time are we going to get a new client. In fact, I would say our hit rate on new clients through responsible disclosures is probably 3%.
Right. That makes sense. And people mistake it for a business development tactic when it's not. We are a mission-focused organization, and we disclose because it's the right thing to do. And we all, that's one of the things that really, really helped me to make my decision, and come in this direction, because everyone is so focused on this, on doing good in the world, securing the world, and doing the right thing and overcoming these problems. And so I also take a lot of pride in it that we do responsible disclosure, but I do think, it was worthwhile to talk about because people don't understand what that is, what to do with it, what it means. And, so it's kind of the sensitive area, but, I think if people look at this thing, through the lens of, we have a collective responsibility to address these problems, because the cost of cybercrime has now evolved into economically the equivalent of its own country, right? And
if cybercrime as a whole, so I'm prepared for this because I recently did a talk that I included a slide on this. If cybercrime as a whole in its aggregate were combined as a world economy, it would be third behind the US and China only.
right. And that's what we are allowing, because if we don't take action, that's what we're allowing. And so it's really, I think we all have this collective responsibility to do our part, for our organizations, to do our part in the world, to educate others and, and change this.
Hear, hear. Absolutely. And in fact, cheers.
Cheers.
Now, I think you poured a much larger glass than I did initially, but I'm on my third one. So
yeah, no, the much larger glass. I looked at your glass and then I looked at mine and I realized much larger.
I've been doing this podcast for a while and this is the right size glass.
Yeah. Oh, I recognize that glass.
Do you?
Yes, I have a similar glass.
Mine has initials.
Oh, yours has initials. Okay. I have a similar glass, but it has different initials on the front. Also 3 initials, but they're not mine.
Oh, well, enjoy.
I'll have to show you sometime.
Absolutely. Well, I tell you what, it's a 308 bullet and it makes a great handhold.
Well, now that I've, I have this, new bottle, right? I should, I can use that glass that I never use.
You should absolutely. I think it fits in just perfectly.
It is. It's perfect. All right.
So I challenged you before we got on to come up with something that you think the average person, the average cybersecurity person, or the average business executive facing cybersecurity decisions thinks is complicated. What did you come up with?
Well, I mean, I think, there's a lot. Like if I can touch on one area that, came to the forefront of my mind, because it's another area I'm passionate about, and I think we should address it. It's a good thing to do. I look at SMBs, small to medium-sized businesses, and they often get attacked as a pathway into attacking critical infrastructure. They are getting impacted in devastating ways by ransomware attacks, other cyber attacks. And as a nation, we have not, come up with a solution to fully support them in the way that we need to. They are so important to our economy, to our way of life. And we have enormous dependencies on our SMBs. And one of the things I look at is that, someone working at, in a small to medium-sized business, and it could be, one of us, like, we've all had different experiences, with businesses as, consultants or in different capacities, and understanding, people don't always have enough people, the technical people needed, resources needed. And they're just left saying, okay, I have a nation state targeting me. I have one, semi IT resource. And what do I do? How do I tackle this? And so people don't realize, again, you don't have to boil the ocean in order to have success, that oftentimes you can take some very, simple actions and basic practices. You can, take advantage of some of the free tools that do exist, apply those, and, be 80%, 90% better than you were. And so I think what we should do is, kind of talk about that a little bit, like some of the top things that an organization can do. That's very practical and, just practical. I'm a huge fan of common sense cybersecurity, doing the things that are practical, that, make a difference and that don't have tremendous overhead. And I think, how we educate the community on these things will help us tremendously too. So I think people don't understand that in order to be cyber secure, they can take action in ways that are not overly technical for themselves to apply. Does that answer your question somewhat?
Well, I mean, it provides the next topic that we're going to work to distill here together to round out the episode, because that's fantastic. SMBs are, well, and I don't focus on SMBs every day. That's not actually my core focus, but I've been a part of an SMB a couple times in my career, including, I think technically currently we're still a small business, even though people think we're huge. And I say that like when I go to conferences and I meet our peers in industry, and I tell them what we're doing, they're like, "Oh my God, you're huge." Mm-hmm. And whereas against some other organizations, we're tiny. Our total reach is something like 125 people, whereas and I say 125 people, that's our total ability to put on the on target with a client. Whereas there's a lot of our competitors out there, or peers, because I for the record, I'm going to throw this out there into the ether. I don't think we have any competitors. I think we have what I call a whole lot of co-opetors. There's a lot of co-opetition available in the market. There's so much need in the market that there isn't competition. Right. There's co-opetition. We need to be cooperating together to drive good end results in the market. Not all of us do the same thing.
Yes. And to that point, I value collaboration highly. And I think, alliance programs are incredibly powerful and important. And I aspire to create alliances with other organizations. And, since the news came out about my position here, I've had other organizations reach out and say, how can we work together? And those are great conversations to have, because at the end of the day, we all need to be working together and leveraging our uniquely, special talents to apply to the problem set, and we'll all be better off. And so, coming back to the SMBs and that ecosystem and the importance, what are some of your thoughts for, I'd be curious to get your take on, some cybersecurity protections and common sense advice. I often tell people, explain to people the importance of patching, the importance of keeping up with all of the updates, and, good cyber hygiene practices that are not overly complicated, and how they can do that, right? But
let's tackle the fundamentals with ransomware as a threat model. And we didn't talk about threat modeling, but that's probably a whole episode in and of itself, is threat modeling, right? Which is the approach of considering how the bad guys might do the bad thing and modeling that so you can defend against it. Let's take the ransomware general threat model, not threat actor specific, not bad guy specific, and break it down. The number one entry point is a legitimate user with a compromised credential, which you can probably buy online.
People are the problem.
People, well, or at least people provide the entry vector one way or another, whether it's because they click a thing or whether it's because they are a thing.
Yes.
Meaning they have a user account that was compromised, maybe even through no fault of their own. Mm-hmm. Multi-factor authentication is the number one control you can implement that handles 80 to 85% of all entry points into organizations.
Yes.
Even if you click the thing and it says, hey, do you want to install, and all these other things, you click the thing and you give the bad guy access, they still have to multi-factor if you've set it up properly to gain access. And as long as you've trained your people to say no, if it's really not them, you're going to be fine. Right. 85% in one control that in most platforms is almost as simple as a checkbox.
Yeah.
So then segmentation.
Yes. Ooh, very passionate about segmentation.
Number two, control, segmentation. The things that don't need to talk to each other for business purposes should not be able to talk to each other. And even if they do need to talk to each other, they should never be able to talk on ports and protocols that don't belong to them.
Right.
Segmentation matters, logical and physical. Things that should not be connected, you divide them up. The cash register should not talk to the AC system.
Mm-hmm.
They
Right.
should be on the same physical or virtual network. Segment it however you want, but limit the potential blast radius of any given attack, because limiting the blast radius limits the potential damage implications.
It's a valve. Yep.
Absolutely. Is it a cure-all? There's no panacea. There is no silver bullet. But between multi-factor authentication and segmentation, you have already highly limited your threat actor, your bad guy's ability to do anything bad in your system. Now, let's assume that both of those things fail. What's next? The ability to recover quickly. Disaster recovery, which consists of two components: actual validated backups, and the ability to actually restore them as step one, and the plan to action in the event of an incident as step two.
Yes.
Once you have multi-factor authentication, network and logical segmentation, because that's data segmentation too. People whose role is bookkeeper should not have the ability to access data that is design and intellectual property. The bookkeeper doesn't need access to the CAD designs. Segment, logical and physical segmentation, backups and response enable resilience. So it doesn't even matter if you get ransomed, if you followed these quick 4 guidelines. If you with ransomware, you reset everybody's password, you make sure they come in through the right segment because they're valid users. You restore the systems they should have access to, and you follow the plan to validate that they were actually who they say they are after the eviction event, which is a part of a good incident response, and you are completely covered. And the last thing you have to do, the last fundamental practice to combat ransomware and enable readiness, is just practice. Have a tabletop or live fire exercise that enables you to figure out where the gaps in your plan are and improve before you have to use the plan for real.
Right. And one thing I say that I swear by this in my career, and I feel this is so important to get this message across to everyone. It's not a check the box thing. Everybody needs to know their positions. Think about how first responders train, so they're prepared for the field. Think about how the military trains. Think about it from that perspective. It should be muscle memory to you. You should know exactly what to do when something happens. You should be prepared. And we have no excuse for not being prepared. It's not a technical thing. That's a logistics thing that can exist in any organization. And there are great tools to the multi-factor authentication piece. If someone doesn't know how to do that, there's a huge campaign right now with DHS and CISO Jen Easterly talking about MFA, and there's a huge focus. There is information that completely distills it on their website, CISA.gov. Go there. There's an entire area that is about stopping ransomware that people can look at as well. And these are all free tools. Super important things to do. And thank you. That was awesome.
I rarely, and I don't think I ever have, and Mark can tell me later if I have. I've never plugged our own services before, but if you're struggling with MFA, Apollo offers an MFA managed service, and we would be more than happy to help you, because MFA is a critical control. And if you can't manage it, find a partner that can, even if it's not Apollo. Even if it's not me. Like I said, this isn't co-opetition. This isn't competition, rather. It's co-opetition. That was Ardbeg again.
Yes.
If you can't handle it, go find a partner who can. Even if it's not my company, that's fine.
Right.
because you might
Right.
have more information.
Right. And I'll say this, like I'm a big do-it-yourselfer. If I don't know, I like to know how everything works. It's the engineering brain, right? So if something breaks, oftentimes I'll try to fix it myself and take things apart. And sometimes this has a successful result. Other times it results in a state of something being broken and broken more. And at sometimes I need to call in the person who can help me fix the thing and do the thing because they have that knowledge and I can learn from them. But sometimes you just have to call the right person and know to do that because it's important.
It's so important. And I will say, please note that I covered the ransomware threat model and the controls involved in the ransomware threat model. The approach involved in the ransomware threat model is different than virtually any other. I didn't talk about asset inventory. I didn't talk about software inventory. I didn't talk about things like
Yeah.
or control and endpoint detection, or
Mhm.
malware protection, or any of those other things.
Yep.
It was responding to a specific threat model, not a general prioritization matrix, or not a CIS 18 controls approach or anything like that. Because in Texas, when I was in government, and I tell you what, I still have it, even though there's no credentials in the back anymore. I still have my badge.
Oh, that's awesome. That's very cool.
There you go.
That
And
is very
and I
cool.
keep it on my desk to remind me that the work matters, because not every day is a good day.
I love that.
But every day that I get to continue the mission, irrespective of where I'm working, is better than yesterday.
Yes, I feel the same way. Anytime I educate someone or help someone or, take steps to do work that's going to make a difference, it's a good day.
Yeah, I'm an overly sappy, dedicated individual, and that badge reminds me of what matters, even though it doesn't have working credentials
Awesome.
anymore. So
That's awesome.
I see that we are more than at time. So Jennifer, do you have any parting thoughts you'd like to leave the audience with?
I think, just in thinking about everything, we've touched on, I just want to say thank you for having me on here, by the way. And, I'm so happy to be, at Apollo, and I'm just excited about the work we're going to do together. And it's really an honor. And I feel like I'm in the right place. But, I just think that for the audience and anyone listening to this, I can't, overstate the importance of great communication, collaboration, and cultivating trusted relationships, outside of your, direct company, like working with others and how that makes a difference. We can't approach these challenges as something that we're accepting of. We can't, accept that the bad guys rule the day and that this is how we're going to live in this world, because it's not, I won't accept it. It's not right. And I think, being able to realize that you can do things that make a difference. You don't have to be a victim of a cyber attack. You can, get the right intelligence, use things, look at the world and look at things that have made a difference in the past. Follow those types of models. Um, I don't want organizations to spend, absurd amounts of money and not be secure. We see a lot of organizations go out into the world and, implement all these different solutions, thinking that they have multi-layered solutions that are going to solve these challenges. And then you go in and you see they've been attacked because things weren't necessarily configured properly or deployed properly, or even dealing with what the actual, vulnerability for that company is. And so, I encourage people to be thoughtful in their approach. And, and I do personally believe that's driven by intelligence. And I also, recommend that people consider, the value of public-private partnerships. And that's it. And then, doing the basic things, if it's an individual, smaller business, focusing on the things that you have control over, like MFA, like patching, good cyber hygiene. And there is a lot of really good information to help you take action. And I think that's it.
I'm going to distill what you said down because that's my goal of the whole show.
Okay.
That proactive resilience and not just capitulating response is the direction we all need to head.
Yes.
That's
Cheers.
That's the shortest I can make that. Cheers.
Cheers.
Well, Jen, I am so glad that you joined me and that you've joined the team. You're the
Thank you
first
so much.
Apollo person I've had on the show, to my recollection, because this topic matters. And while we have a lot of enormously talented people on the team, not everybody wants to hear a show that's just two Apollo people talking. And there will be future ones where I bring on other Apollo people just because I have access to really cool people just by working here. The importance of this topic warranted this discussion. And actually your team is probably where I will pull my next from, because the ability to take a proactive stance and reject the existence of attack as normal.
Thank you. Yes.
As status quo is exactly the direction I hope we all go. So thank you one more time for being here. This has been Cybersecurity Distilled, and it's an Apollo production because my company and my leadership support me in doing this, and I appreciate them so much for it, because these discussions, I hope, turn out to be useful and actionable, if not entertaining. I like the entertainment factor, but at the bottom of the chain, I hope that it turns out to be useful. You don't have to accept being attacked. There's no reason to normalize guy abuse.
No, we can't normalize bad things.
That's right. Normalize taking a proactive stance, normalize getting ahead of the problem, and normalize properly integrating all forms of threat intelligence into your program. Cheers one last time.
And cheers to that.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.